The first target dates for Starship Flight 12 have finally dropped, along with a brand new trajectory. Pad 2 is now performing full launch retraction tests in preparation for Flight 12, but it may have to wait a little bit longer because I think the tank farm might be having some issues, and Ship 40 is rolling out to Massey's for testing on a brand new ship cryo stand ahead of its turn for Flight 13. And LC-39A's tank farm continues to roar as progress on Starship's first Space Coast launch facility marches on, with the goal of supporting its first launch by the end of the year. From Florida Space Coast to South Texas, we have all of this coming up and more on this week's Starship Update. Let's start things off this week at the Massey's test site. A mystery component was lifted into the nose cone jail a few weeks ago. At the time, we had no idea what kind of testing was coming. But this week, we finally got a major clue about what lies ahead. A booster liquid oxygen landing tank was the culprit being lifted into the nose cone jail. While the aft section of a booster recently completed its testing campaign with test tank B18.1, the previous occupant on the Super Crusher, that tank only included a section of the methane transfer tube. That means the booster's liquid oxygen landing tank has still never been subjected to the full forces that it's expected to see in flight. During our latest flyover, we spotted a small ring section that appears to match the exact diameter of the landing tank. We believe this ring will be installed on top of the tank for can crusher testing. It will likely be pulled downward and possibly sideways as well. We'll have to wait until SpaceX installs the actuators to see exactly what forces they plan to put on the landing tank. Test tank B18.3 also completed its third test inside of the Super Crusher this week as it undergoes critical testing to validate the redesigned booster forward section. The integrated hot staging ring must withstand the full forces of a Starship pushing against it, especially around max Q. Sitting on top of B18.3 is a ship skirt section topped with a can crusher cap. This setup allows the entire stack to be compressed while the actuators pull both horizontally and diagonally to simulate side loads. Detailed images after those cryo tests show that actuators on the can crusher cap have now been installed. However, the grid fin simulators still need their own actuators attached, so engineers can test whether the sockets are truly ready for the loads seen during flight. And in a somewhat surprising turn of events, B18.3 is now supporting TPS tiles? And now, you might rightly be wondering why a booster test tank has shipped tiles on it. The answer though makes perfect sense when you think about it. One of the biggest challenges for Starship reusability is developing a heat shield that stays on through the entirety of flight. By testing tiles on a test tank that experiences flight-like loads, compression, pulling, and pushing, SpaceX can evaluate how well the tiles hold up under these exact conditions. That makes B18.3 an excellent flying testbed for tile attachment methods. With version 3 flight vehicles, SpaceX will not be conducting the same sort of experimentation as seen before on version 1 and version 2. So best to test what you can without requiring flight hardware. B18.3 isn't the only test tank sporting tiles right now though. A few weeks ago, S39.1, the ship aft section test tank, also received a large patch of heat shield tiles. Like B18.3, it looks like S39.1 will be used to test different tile attachment methods. However, when we checked back in on S39.1 later, a lot of those tiles were already missing. We didn't see it undergo a cryo test, but it's possible it was run through a can crusher test with flight level pressure in the tanks, but no cryo load. The more likely and less exciting explanation is that the tiles were simply removed by hand for inspection. One particularly interesting detail is that tiles have now been applied directly to the stringers on S39.1. Up until now, we have only seen tiles on the smooth surfaces. Placing them on the stringers means they'll have to handle a different pattern of contraction and expansion as the underlying metal flexes under load. With all of these tile experiments underway on varying test tanks, it's going to be fascinating to see how Starship's TPS evolves in the coming months. Now, with all of that talk about the various test tanks that SpaceX is using to validate the version 3 design out of the way, it's time to shift gears and look at the actual flight vehicles the company is preparing for launch. Starting off with Ship 40, the ship currently assigned to Flight 13, which recently rolled out of Gigabay 2 at the production site and over to Massey's for its initial testing campaign. During its first visit, Ship 40 is expected to complete up to 3 cryogenic proof tests, following the same profile as we saw with Ship 39. These proof tests are designed to verify the structural integrity of the vehicle while it's holding super chill propellants. In this case, it'll be loaded with cryogenic liquid oxygen and, instead of methane, liquid nitrogen as a safe, non-flammable substitute. The rollout also gave us a great up-close look at the vehicle from top to bottom. Remember those tile patches on the leeward side of Ship 39? Well, they're back on Ship 40. There are 2 large patches near the aft section, similar to Ship 39, but we're also seeing new lines of tiles running across the body. Now, it's possible SpaceX simply hasn't finished installing all the heat shield tiles on the leeward side yet, so we may see even more added in the coming weeks. Similar to Ship 39 during its cryo testing campaign, Ship 40 is currently missing all of the aft docking ports, raceway covers, and the aero covers on the heat shield side that protects the flap hinges during flight and re-entry. But these components are not required for cryogenic testing since the vehicle will not be subjected to flight conditions. So, just like we saw before, they should be installed between cryo testing and static fire testing. Ship 40 is only half of the story for Flight 13 though. You can't fly without a booster, unless you want to do a suborbital hop, but those days are long gone. So instead of Gigabay 1, SpaceX has been busy stacking the next flight-ready booster, Booster 20. Last week, we reported that production teams only needed to roll out one more forward barrel section for the methane tank before they could finish stacking the vehicle. And, right on schedule, that forward 3 section came out of Star Factory and rolled straight into Gigabay 1. A few days later, once the final welds were complete on the methane tank, the landing tank stand rolled back in so full booster stacking could begin. Now, the way they stack boosters is a little unusual, so here's a quick step-by-step. First, the landing tank stand is rolled into the bay and positioned in the center. That's because Gigabay 1 has 2 bridge cranes, one on each side. This gives teams the necessary spacing to move the separate booster sections from either cranes when needed. Once in position, they can finally lift the completed methane tank section and lower it out of the oxygen tank section and weld them together. Once complete, the booster is fully stacked. Thankfully, ship stacking is a lot simpler. They build those from the top down instead of in 2 separate halves. A clear sign that stacking is finished is when the landing tank stand rolls back outside. With Booster 20 now almost certainly fully stacked in Gigabay 1, it's only a matter of time before it heads to Massey's for its first testing campaign. But there is still a solid checklist to complete before it can roll out though, and SpaceX needs to install all of the autogenous pressurization lines that run from the aft section to the tops of both the oxygen and methane tanks as well. They also have to attach the 4 shines and install all of the COPVs, or composite overwrap pressure vessels. These contain high pressure carbon dioxide for spinning up the engines, gaseous methane for ignition, nitrogen for valve actuation, and the pressure and gases for the landing tanks. Once that hardware is installed, the team will then run final checkouts, testing every valve and pressurizing all the lines and tanks with gas to confirm that there are no leaks. Of course, if any issues pop up, they'll fix or replace the parts as needed. But once everything checks out, Booster 20 will be ready to head to Massey's for testing. After Ship 41 rolled out and began stacking in Gigabay 2 a couple of weeks ago, Ship 42 is now the oldest ship still inside of Star Factory. Unfortunately, it still has a while to go before it can join the flight line though. But before any ship can roll out for stacking, the nose cone must first be mated to the payload bay section. That combined assembly usually takes anywhere from 2 to 3 months to exit Star Factory, at least at this pace, so we're looking at a bit of a wait for Ship 42 unless SpaceX finds a way to accelerate the process, which I would not rule out whatsoever. They have to build these things really fast after all. Meanwhile, Ship 43 and Ship 45 continue to see steady progress on their nose cones, with tile pins, TPS tiles, and ablative material now being installed on the windward side. Not much has changed there. On a more positive note, Ship 46 has just moved to its next stage of construction. It has left the liquid oxygen header sleeving section, where the nose cone receives its LOX header tank components, and is now advanced to the methane sleeving station. It's nice to see work progressing here more. It's a sign that activity is ramping up, as it should if SpaceX wants to meet their current cadence goals, especially with NASA's HLS commitments. We've also noticed a curious bit of activity over in Sanchez this week. The remains of Booster 17's aft section, which many assume was heading for scrapping, was moved closer to the highway. This unexpected move suggests its final demise might not quite be as imminent as we thought. We don't really know what that could mean, but it's worth noting. Right next door to Sanchez, we have Starbase's Gigabay, which is also progressing very well in itself. While they're nearing the completion of Level 5, SpaceX has already begun erecting the framework for the penultimate level, Level 6. That still puts it a bit behind the Gigabay here in Florida, which already has some of the structure for Level 7 in place and is actively expanding. Level 6 is particularly significant though, because this is where the brackets for the massive transfer aisle bridge cranes will be installed, followed eventually by the cranes themselves. These heavy lift cranes are rated for around 400 tons and will be used to move barrel sections and fully stacked vehicles between the various work stands and workstations inside of the bay. In addition to the big transfer aisle cranes, SpaceX will also install smaller cranes dedicated to stacking operations of the work stands, though we don't yet know their exact lift capability. As the building continues to grow toward its full 7-level height, crews are also steadily adding cladding to the outer walls. They've now reached the top of level 3 and have begun work on level 4. As we have mentioned numerous times before, the completion of Gigabay will be a major milestone for Starbase. It should enable a significantly higher cadence of vehicle construction and eventually much faster turnaround in between launches, though that will ultimately depend on both the vehicle design and pad operations as well. Let's go ahead and move down the road to the launch site. The last of the smaller tanks and the vaporizer at the old tank farm were removed this week, and the smaller tanks were transported down to the port of Brownsville. That leaves only the 2 distinctive ribbed tanks as the final surviving tanks from the launch site from the original Flight 1 era. While both of these ribbed tanks will remain part of the tank farm, one has already been moved over to join the other 4 methane tanks now as well. More sheet piles also went in at Pad 1 this week. Even though we saw the jet grouting rig leave the site last week, groundwork for the new flame trench is still far from complete. A drilling rig continues boring holes for rebar and concrete that will support not only the flame trench itself, but the entire pad structure. To give the crews and machinery room to operate, the chopsticks on Tower 1 have been closed. This had to be done manually, since all of the hardware that normally moves them has been completely removed from the tower for rework, exactly as we've seen happening over at Pad 2. In more positive news, the first A-frame for the orbital launch mount service structure was lifted into place. While the finished structure will look similar to the one at Pad 2, the construction approach here is quite different. During our flyover earlier this month, we spotted a large jig already lying on the ground right next to where the flame trench will be dug. Because the service structure is being built away from the active trench area, it will eventually have to be lifted into its final position. However, constructing it off to the side makes many parts far more accessible during assembly, which should make the overall process easier and faster. That's just classic SpaceX for you, learning from past experiences and applying the lessons learned to their methods going forward. The air separation unit is also making steady progress this week. We saw the module responsible for separating the compressed air being joined to the purification module with multiple large pipes. Here's a quick reminder of how that works. Compressed air is just a mixture of all the gases in our atmosphere. It's then purified, and during that process, moisture and carbon dioxide are removed. To separate the purified air into its separate elements, it is then liquefied and then slowly boiled in a distillation process. Since nitrogen boils off at a lower temperature than oxygen, the gases can be cleverly routed into different tanks, effectively separating them into each of their elements. Once separated, the commodities are purified and then routed into the tank farm for storage. Meanwhile, the housing for the air compressors continues to take shape, with more sections being welded together. The first compressor already has its frame in place, while the second one is still waiting for its enclosure. And to power the entire ASU, SpaceX relocated an entire electrical bunker from the danger lot near Starhopper. It's now sitting on fresh footings that we spotted during our last flyover. Over at Pad 2, we checked in last week on how close the deluge system, orbital launch mount, and ship quick disconnect arm, or SQD, were to supporting a launch. While the flame trench was still undergoing necessary work, the orbital launch mount looked largely ready, and the SQD arm was in the middle of major work, including the removal and reinstallation of a methane swivel joint. The week ended with a successful retraction test of both the arm and the umbilical plate that connects to the ship. This week brought a lot more testing as well. Frost appeared on both the liquid oxygen and the liquid methane supply lines on the SQD arm, confirming that last week's modifications were successful. The arm was also purged multiple times with gaseous nitrogen from the tank farm vaporizers. During construction, foreign object debris, or FOD, like dust and sand, inevitably gets inside of the lines that carry propellant and other commodities. If that debris isn't removed, it can enter the ship and cause serious issues by blocking vents, engine inlets, or damaging components. Seeing these purge operations is a strong sign that work on the SQD lines is complete and the arm is being prepared for flight. With the lines purged, teams also ran extensive movement tests, extending and retracting the arm, the umbilical, and the plate doors. Getting the retraction timing just right is critical. You don't want the arm swinging away while the umbilical is still attached at liftoff, and you definitely do not want the arm itself to stay in place as 33 Raptor engines light up underneath it. That's why multiple full retraction tests were performed throughout the week, checking that every line moves correctly in the right sequence and at the proper speed. While the SQD arm was getting its workout in, the hold down arms and the booster quick disconnect doors, or BQDs, got in the action as well. Several full launch retraction tests were conducted, making sure the timing between the hold-on arms, BQDs, and SQD arm was perfectly synchronized. SpaceX then performed a detonation suppression system test to cap off the day. Fast forward to this past Saturday, a full deluge test was performed utilizing both the flame trench and top deck systems. However, during that test, a piece of metal was quite literally shot airborne in the area of the tank farm. Guessing by the location, we think this could be a roof panel that was blown upwards thanks to a gas generator carburetor rupturing. We're not 100% certain as to exactly what happened here, so we'll have to keep our eyes on how SpaceX opts to handle this repair-wise, and how it may or may not affect the current timeline for Flight 12. The first net or no earlier than dates have now been dropped, with Flight 12 targeting as early as May 12th. That means we could see Starship launch in under 2 weeks. However, since we learned last week that the deluge system is still being dialed in, there's a good chance that we'll see Booster 19 head back to the pad for additional static fire testing. And the entire flight campaign is going to pivot on how well that goes. SpaceX is clearly taking a much more methodical approach with version 3, as we have seen not only with Booster 19's testing campaign, but also with the extensive work on all the dedicated test tanks. That said, as we mentioned earlier, not all actuators have yet been installed on the B18.3 test tank for the grid fin and landing tank testing. That hardware is mainly relevant for booster landing though, and not necessarily for catching the booster in the chopsticks. Additional pre-flight activity that we expect to see soon is a full wet dress rehearsal of a full stack vehicle, both booster and ship together for the first time. SpaceX already knows how the booster behaves during tanking, but those previous operations were done without a ship stacked on top of it. Now, they could, in theory, choose to skip that step entirely and go right to a launch attempt and only do a wet dress rehearsal if issues come up that cannot be fixed in time in the launch window. Looking back at Flight 7, SpaceX performed a wet dress rehearsal on January 11th, 2025 and launched just 5 days later on January 16th. That was the first version 2 flight, and tanking operations haven't dramatically changed since then, but the vehicles and the pad have. And that being said, there are still plenty of unknowns and potential items that could push the schedule. So what do you think? When will Flight 12 actually fly? Let us know in the comment section down below. And while the first net dates are exciting, what might be even more intriguing is the brand new trajectory planned for Flight 12. Although Flight 12 will still not be a fully orbital mission, it will fly a significantly different inclination, threading the needle between Cuba and Mexico. The ship landing trajectory covers a broadly similar area, but if we look closer towards the Australian side, the latter part of re-entry takes on a distinctive hook shape. This lines up with the simulated tower catch flight path that we saw ahead of Flight 11. That sweeping turn during re-entry will position the ship perfectly for a tower catch attempt. And, as Elon himself has mentioned before, SpaceX wants to complete 2 precise water landings before attempting to bring the ship back to the launch site. Seeing Starship make clear progress toward a controlled re-entry and landing is exciting, and it could mean that we might see a successful ship catch as early as Flight 14. Fingers crossed. Over here on the Space Coast, SpaceX is continuing to make solid progress on everything needed to launch Starship from here. Thanks to Harry Stranger, we have fresh satellite imagery of Launch Complex 39A, and it's clear that the new tank farm is really beginning to take shape and looks close to being ready to support operations. Comparing it to Starbase, the methane side here still has some catching up to do. We currently see 5 horizontal tanks installed, with at least 3 more yet to be added. In contrast, Starbase already has 8 methane tanks of varying sizes. The lock side of the tank farm here appears further along, currently sitting at 6 storage tanks, while Starbase operates with 8. That all being said though, the tank farm itself has been active and breathing at times here. Most recently, when we were out here picking up remote cameras after the recent Viasat 3 Falcon Heavy launch, right as we passed the pad in our buses, the Starship tank farm roared to life with a massive vent, which could be heard clearly inside our coach bus. Mind you, this was less than 2 hours after launch, so it's kind of wild to see them pick up testing so soon afterwards. The pad itself remains about 5 to 6 months behind that of Pad 2 and Starbase, so there is still a lot of work that needs to happen. But as we see things now, it could very well be ready to support launch operations by the end of 2026, barring a good result from Flight 12. Moving away from Complex 39A, launch infrastructure destined for Space Launch Complex 37 has been receiving some additions from Marmac 31, which recently delivered more tanks for the brand new pad. Time for our McGregor Minute. This week has seen a hive of activity at SpaceX's premier engine testing facility for the Raptor 3 program, with a total of 24 engine tests conducted across the 3 dedicated stands: Raptor North, Raptor South, and the vertical stand. A couple of notable milestones stand out. Raptor North completed its longest firing to date, a massive 400-second burn that smashed the stand's previous record of 348 seconds, which had only been set a couple of days earlier, which had also just shattered the other previous record of 197 seconds just a few days before that. Kind of insane. Given the impressive duration, this is most likely a ship-designated engine, as the burn time exceeds all second-stage burns that we have seen on Starship Flight so far. Another key development was that spotters have now documented SpaceX's 147th Raptor 3 engine. This shows production is continuing at full speed, and the company is already well into building and testing engines for the 3rd and possibly even 4th version 3 Starship Flight. Alongside those high serial numbers, We also caught several engines from Booster 19's recent 10-engine static fire attempt. After the hard report from that test, SpaceX appears to be evaluating their condition, which is why they were sent to McGregor for further verification. It's entirely possible that we'll see some of these engines return to flight in the future. Wasting hardware is no bueno here. Well, with April coming to a close, I'd say it was a solid month for Starship. We saw both Booster 19 and Ship 39 conducting their engine test campaigns after a very long wait. Pad 2 has also been made ready ahead of launch, only needing a full stack to properly flex all of its muscles and support both a ship and booster at the same time. Future vehicles like Booster 20 and Ship 40 have completed their stacking, while Ship 41 assembly is now well underway as well. But May will hopefully be the month where SpaceX can finally put everything together for the first time in the version 3 era and launch Starship Flight 12. It has been a very long time coming, and I know all of you are chomping at the bit to see Starship fly again, as are we. I'm Max Evans for NSF. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.